When a group of weary Civil War soldiers posed for a routine photo at their campsite during a short break, no one expected it to become a historical anomaly. But nearly 2 centuries later, when experts zoomed into the trees behind them, what they saw made them turn pale. It was August of 1864, and the war had carved deep into the hearts of Virginia. Just outside Petersburg, a Union regiment, the 32nd Infantry, set up camp beneath a canopy of oaks, their boots muddy, their spirits brittle. That afternoon, with the sun pressing down and gunfire faint in the distance, a visiting war photographer named Daniel Rourke arrived with his bulky wooden camera and a single glass plate. The soldiers of the 32nd Infantry were deep into their 3rd summer of war, faces burned, uniforms threadbare, humor dry as dust. Some men reclined with their backs against logs, chewing slowly through hardtack as if it might taste better with enough patience. Others gathered in pairs, sharing cigarettes and muttered jokes. One man used the sole of his boot to grind a bullet mold into shape. Another, older fellow, scratched a letter to someone named Ellie with fingers dirt-stained and trembling. Into this lived-in mess stepped Daniel Rourke, his camera swaddled in cloth, his face damp with effort. "Gentlemen," he called, his voice straining for cheer, "if you'd be kind enough to spare me 10 minutes, I'll make you immortal." No one moved at first. Then a few rose, brushing dust from sleeves, smoothing beards. They gathered with the sluggish obedience of men who'd seen too much. Some sat, others leaned on their rifles while a few managed half smiles. There wasn't excitement, just resignation. They knew the photo wasn't for them. It was for the wives who feared every telegram, for the children too young to remember their faces, a keepsake in case they didn't come back. None of them knew that this quiet moment, meant to preserve brotherhood, would also capture a predator hiding in the trees. Caleb Morgan hovered at the edge of the crowd. He looked too clean, too upright, and too young, which was precisely what he was. Just 18, he had arrived only 2 weeks earlier with the stiffness of someone who still believed he might leave whole. The loss of his older brothers, Daniel and Eli, was still fresh on his mind, though he rarely spoke of them. He wore their deaths in the careful way he folded his blanket, in how he stood just behind the older men, but never quite among them. As the group settled into position, Lieutenant Amos Reddick, who'd survived Antietam with a scar across his chin and a voice like scraped iron, pointed at Caleb. "You best look brave, Caleb," he drawled, stepping aside to give the photographer room. "This photo's forever." That earned a few tired chuckles. Caleb forced a smile, then dropped it just as quickly. He stood toward the back, one hand resting lightly on his canteen, the other clenched behind his back. Rourke adjusted the lens. He counted down softly. The men held still. A breathless pause. Then the shutter clicked. It was over in less than a second, but for those men, unknowingly framed in history, it would be the last moment of normalcy. Within days, half of them would scatter, wounded or dead, across an ambushed trail they hadn't meant to follow. And just above them, nestled into the dense foliage, a figure watched, unmoving, unspeaking, his mission already in motion. For decades, the photograph sat unnoticed in a faded storage box labeled Uncatalogued Glass Plates, MISC. Infantry. After the war, Daniel Rourke had returned north, opened a small portrait studio in upstate New York, and quietly retired. His war negatives, bundled in paper and twine, were sold off piecemeal after his death in 1902. Most were lost to mildew, others to fire. This one, miraculously intact, had somehow passed through estate sales and personal collections, surviving by accident more than intention. In 2023, the photo resurfaced at a modest auction in rural Pennsylvania. A retired antique dealer had discovered it among the belongings of his late uncle, an amateur Civil War collector who had kept the plate wrapped in flannel inside a tobacco tin. The dealer listed it alongside vintage buttons and bayonets, expecting little fanfare. Dr. Lauren Hensley, a senior archivist from the National Military Archives, was browsing the online catalog for a separate project when the image caught her eye. Even in its raw state, There was something undeniably intimate about the composition, the weariness in the soldier's eyes, the stillness, the unspoken weight between them. It wasn't a battlefield scene, but a human one, a glimpse into the liminal space between fighting and waiting. Hensley purchased the plate immediately, sensing its potential historical value. She had no idea it would become the centerpiece of a mystery no textbook had prepared her for. Back at the archives, she and her restoration team began the careful process of cleaning and digitizing the image. It became part of a larger initiative to build interactive museum exhibits, where viewers could learn the names, ranks, and backstories of photographed soldiers. With AI-enhanced facial recognition software, they could now cross-reference military records, enlistment papers, and pension files with surprising accuracy. Initially, it was routine. The AI identified several men as part of the 32nd Infantry based on facial structure and unit badges barely visible on their uniforms. Caleb Morgan, for instance, matched an enlistment photo from July 1864 and a hospital record filed just 2 weeks after the photo was taken. Then came the final stage of review, background enhancement. The technician zoomed in on the upper right quadrant, near the cluster of trees that framed the group. Using noise reduction tools and shadow balancing, they adjusted the contrast for clarity. It revealed a face, but not just any face. The AI ran his face through its database, as it had done dozens of times before. And this time, it returned a match. One that made every historian in the room go silent and turn pale instantly. The man in the tree was Elias Finch, a wanted infiltrator, a man whose name had only appeared in fragments, buried reports, whispered suspicions, and declassified intelligence. They had found him, long after it mattered, and somehow he had always been watching. At first, it seemed like an error. The match returned by the AI system felt too precise, too intentional. The name Elias Finch appeared in the result field, followed by a single black-and-white mugshot from 1863. It was from a military security archive, a lesser-known branch that had documented suspected espionage during the Civil War. Finch's face was unmistakable. Angular jaw, downturned mouth, and eyes that appeared, even in grainy images, too perceptive for comfort. Lauren Hensley leaned in closer, adjusting the screen. "Run it again," she said. They did. Same result. One of the younger technicians, a former military student intern, stared at the face on screen, then slowly pushed his chair back. "This is terrifying," he muttered. The room went quiet. No one disagreed. The man in the tree wasn't part of the posing soldiers. He wasn't listed in any infantry registry. According to the notes embedded in the match file, Finch was a known infiltrator with a trail of misdirection and betrayal behind him. He had impersonated both Union and Confederate scouts at various times, inserting himself into troop movements just long enough to redirect supplies, falsify reports, and vanish. The last credible sighting of him had been in mid-1864 in Virginia, just weeks before the ambush that devastated the 32nd Infantry. Finch had been operating under the alias Edward Marsh, posing as a Union cartographer. A lieutenant's note in the archive stated, "He slipped away the night before the attack. We trusted him. God help us, we trusted him." Finch was never caught. His name remained on informal wanted lists well into the 1870s. But the war ended before he could be brought to justice. It was assumed he either died in obscurity or fled the country. But now, with this photo, his presence was undeniable. He had been there, watching from the trees as the camera captured the men he was about to betray. What made it worse, more chilling, was the timing. The photograph had been taken just 3 days before the Deep Bottom disaster, where Union forces walked straight into an ambush based on faulty scouting information. Survivors remembered receiving orders based on new intel delivered by a trusted scout. Now, the evidence suggested that scout had been Finch. He was already gone when they realized, Lauren whispered mostly to herself. They never stood a chance. The team stared at the screen in silence, each of them absorbing the magnitude. This wasn't just a photo anymore. It was a smoking gun, decades too late to matter, but still echoing with betrayal. As word of the discovery spread within archival circles, the photo quickly moved from obscurity to obsession. The image, now dubbed the Finch exposure, circulated among military historians, cryptologists, and intelligence scholars who had spent years studying unsolved Civil War anomalies. The consensus was immediate and sobering. This was the first verifiable photograph of Elias Finch. But confirmation sparked a second crisis. How deep had his sabotage gone? Dr. Lauren Hensley, already leading the archival restoration, coordinated with military history departments across several universities. A cross-reference initiative began, comparing Finch's timeline, reconstructed painstakingly through letters, dispatches, and field reports, with known tactical failures. Patterns emerged: misdirected cavalry units, missing supply trains, patrols sent to abandoned coordinates, all within the window of Finch's known aliases. One event stood out: the Third Battle of Deep Bottom. Survivors from the 32nd Infantry had long puzzled over why their unit advanced under unclear orders that day. Lauren's team traced Finch's infiltration tactics: temporary enlistments, swapped documents, false papers that looked authentic under inspection, but always included slight deliberate errors. His real genius wasn't in disguise, but in trust. He made people believe they knew him. The deeper they dug, the clearer it became. Finch's sabotage wasn't limited to maps or rumors. He had infected decision-making itself, seeding doubt, rerouting action, and walking away before the first bullet was fired. And all of it, improbably, was captured in a single photo. One man, watching with the eerie calm of someone who already knows how the story ends. As the investigation deepened, so did the weight of its implications. One by one, the names and voices of long-forgotten soldiers were pulled from fragments, journals, letters, and debriefs. These weren't just footnotes, they were witnesses. Men who had seen something off, sensed betrayal but had no proof, and carried the doubt with them into old age or an early grave. Lauren began scouring smaller repositories, local archives, obscure museum basements, searching for anything that could corroborate Finch's presence beyond strategy and rumor. It was then that a thread emerged. Several accounts from the Deep Bottom campaign referenced a man seen just before departure, one who didn't speak much, always writing, always watching. Most had dismissed him, but one name appeared twice: Corporal Jeremy Holden. In a locked cabinet at the Richmond War Records Museum, Lauren found what she hadn't realized she was looking for: a single-page letter, brittle with age, filed under miscellaneous, suspicious correspondence. It was written by a Union corporal named Jeremy Holden, one of the few survivors of the Deep Bottom ambush. Holden's letter was never mailed. Dated August 23, 1864, and addressed simply to Mother, it began like any other wartime note: talk of weather, poor rations, and bone-deep fatigue. But halfway down the page, the tone changed. "I swear someone led the whole infantry into that ambush," he wrote. "It didn't match what our scouts were saying, and the orders felt rushed. Too neat, too certain. What's strange is, all our maps started going through the new cartographer. Quiet fellow, always writing. No one really knew his name." Lauren felt a quiet weight settle over her chest as she read and reread those lines. The one Holden described, the one who passed along misleading orders just days before the Deep Bottom ambush, was now staring back at her from the photo. Elias Finch hadn't just infiltrated the 32nd Infantry, he had orchestrated their downfall, watched them pose for a photo, and slipped away while they marched toward ruin. But it was more than strategic sabotage. Finch had corrupted the trust chain. He had inserted himself into the quiet spaces between certainty and doubt, then exploited that silence until it broke men apart. By now, several military failures across Virginia had been linked to Finch's presence. Each one involved fractured units, supply misrouting, or inexplicable orders. He wasn't just a rogue element. He had operated like a slow poison within the Union Army. His actions didn't end battles. They eroded trust, destabilized units from within, and left just enough doubt to unravel command. And then he disappeared. There were no fingerprints, no graves, no confession. Finch had escaped into the fog of history, his final insult being invisibility. Until the photo. Until now. For Lauren and her team, The realization was devastating and awe-inspiring. They hadn't just uncovered a photograph. They had documented a rare instance where history blinked and exposed its raw underside. A single shutter click had captured not just soldiers at rest, but the architect of their undoing. The museum revised its plans. The photo would no longer be simply a portrait of comrades in war. It would be part of a new exhibit titled Saboteur in the Frame. The AI software's log and match history would be included as part of the presentation, underlining the haunting reality. The truth had been hiding in plain sight, pixel by pixel. Today, the photo rests in a climate-controlled glass case at the National Military Archives, 32nd Infantry Union Army, camp near Petersburg, August 1864. Visitors lean in close as if proximity might reveal something deeper. Many stare at the tree line first, drawn to the barely noticeable figure perched in the branches, rifle slung across his back, gaze fixed not on the camera, but on the soldiers below, whose fates he quietly sealed. Alongside the photo sits a timeline of his suspected operations. Battles turned sour, units fractured, confusion sown not by gunfire but by whispers and wrong turns. For historians, it closed a chapter long open. For descendants of the 32nd, it gave shape to an absence many had only sensed through broken family trees and war medals passed down with no names attached. And for Lauren, the archivist who unearthed it all, it stood as a sobering reminder. Even in an image meant to preserve brotherhood, the face of betrayal can hide in plain sight. Still, quiet, waiting to be seen. What would you have done if you were the one to uncover it? Let us know in the comments below and be sure to subscribe to the channel.